Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to week 2 of our Developing Consciousness class. I'd also like to welcome all of you who are live streaming, wherever you are. It's really good to have you with us. If you missed one of the classes or aren't able to be here, there is a book at the back that you can use just to catch up, and the book is on Amazon as well. It's just called Developing Consciousness, so if you wanted to get that, that would enable you to catch up with any of the other classes that you missed. And also, there'll always be handouts at the back, so you can just pick up a handout when you go from the class today. And if you're watching online, the handouts are just on the first page that you get to. You can download those handouts, and do feel free to do that. Good. Well, I always think it's a good idea just to look at, what's happening in the class and what we're doing over the 8 weeks. Last week, we looked at the nature of consciousness and reality. And really, the idea of this class is to gradually come to some sort of an agreement as to what we can talk about when we talk about the nature of spirituality and consciousness. Because when I first got into the whole spirituality thing, I was interested in one thing, which was enlightenment. That's what they said that, it was all about. So that's what I wanted. And when I went and spoke to people about it, they either said to me, come and meditate for 2 years and then you'll know what I'm talking about, or, come and join my religion or whatever it is. No one was able to sort of say it straight and say, this is what the territory is about. This is really what the ideas of enlightenment are around. And so I wanted to put that into a course and a book just to make it really simple. And so the idea is that we sort of build up an understanding that is not based on theological language or based on sort of reference spiritual ideas, but based on everyday ideas, things that we talk about and we can agree on. So when we come to talk about things like enlightenment or spirituality, we're using the language that we'd use in everyday life rather than trying to use Buddhist language or Christian language. So that's really what it was about. And so this is the arc of the course over the 8 weeks. Last week we looked at the nature of consciousness and reality, and we really looked at, what is the nature of consciousness? What is consciousness? And I think one of the big takeaways we looked at, actually to be conscious is to have an experience of being. And the nature of our consciousness comes to us through our senses. And we looked at the senses, and I think the first thing I wanted to say in terms of how we develop our consciousness is that we just take our senses totally for granted. We get up in the morning and, we don't go, wow, I can smell the breakfast or the coffee, or, isn't the day wonderful? We get up and think, oh no, gosh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that, my wife said the tube off the toothpaste, all that sort of stuff is going through our minds all the time. And we just forget how amazing it is to be alive. We're lucky here because we've got the mountains and, things like that. But really, if someone came down and said, from another planet and said, look, you'd be able to see everything in the world. You can hear everything. You can touch, you can feel, you can smell, you can taste. That really is all of it. And, if nothing else in this course, if one got the amazingness of what it is to be alive and the amazingness of the senses, that's the first step in developing consciousness. And I mentioned a film last week, which I think is a really good film about the senses. It's called Perfect Sense, and it stars Ewan McGregor. And actually, it's an amazing film because it starts off with people start going deaf. And it starts to happen all over the world. And then you gradually realize in the film that people are just losing their senses and the impact that it has on life when the senses begin to go. It's an interesting thing, worth watching. So I looked at that. The nature of that. And then we looked at, given that we have have got a sense of the aliveness and what it is to be conscious, the next thing is, how do you make up your reality? And we looked at how the senses go to make up our reality, that we look and we see and we hear and we smell, and we come to an idea of what is going on in life. We say, well, this is what's happening. I'm in a course, there's a bloke blabbing at the front, I'm sitting around, there are other people in their chairs, and so this is a course. And it's in a chapel, so there might be some spiritual bit to it. And we gradually build it up. But as I was saying last week, the trouble is that we come to an idea of what we think is going on of our reality. But then after that, we might miss something, or, not be aware of something that's going on. And so our reality becomes a bit skewed, and what we think is happening is not necessarily what's happening, because we've made decisions about people, we've made decisions about things, and we operate out of those decisions. And I mentioned that quote from Philip K. Dick, who said that reality, Philip K. Dick, who wrote Blade Runner, he said that reality is that which continues to exist after you've stopped believing in it. And we're so tied up with our belief. We're so tied up with the decisions we've made about each other, about what's happening. And so our reality tends to be in our heads a lot. So we looked at the nature of conscious reality. This week we're going to look at the nature of the mind. How does that affect the way that we operate in our world? How does that affect our reality? And then on the third week we're going to look at what the nature of spirituality is. And it's a sort of very nebulous subject. I'm going to sort of share my experience of how I got to be where I am next week, and then we're going to explore what actually spirituality does mean. And there are exercises in the class. It's not just me talking throughout. So we look at spirituality and then the tradition of mystical reality. How have different cultures interpreted that experience of spirituality? And are there differences, are there similarities between those experiences? And then in week 5, I think, unless you actually ground this in changing yourself, this just becomes, spiritual stand-up. I'm just talking and, you're listening. And it needs to make a difference to who we are. So we look at what the nature of personal transformation is, and then the nature of spiritual practice, and then meditation. And the last week, we look at a reflection on the spiritual life. And I use the Buddhist 10 ox-heading pictures, which look at the whole range of the spiritual life, how it starts from where you're interested in spirituality or whatever, and goes right the way through to the point where you can let go of the whole spiritual aspect of things. So that's basically the arc of the course and how it works. Anybody got any questions either about that or about anything that we talked about last week at all? Okay, so we're gonna look at the mind. I think I just want to start by this idea that we can have two realities going on at the same time. We have to really work out what our reality is, because otherwise we can't be appropriate to that in our lives. I said last week that gravity, you don't really have to believe in anything as you fall off the roof and hit the ground. Gravity does exist. And what we're trying to discover here is, are there any things that you can rely on in terms of spiritual laws or whatever it is, things that you can rely on and be certain about? Because we're trying to work out what we can rely on. And often our reality doesn't always correspond to what's going on. And this is a lovely story. I like sort of guru stories. This is a lovely story about two realities that exist. Providing that he makes and wins an argument about Buddhism with those who live there, any wandering monk can remain in a Zen temple. So to be in a Zen temple, you have to go to the temple and win an argument about Buddhism. If he's defeated in the argument, he has to move on. Now, in a temple in the northern part of Japan, 2 brother monks were dwelling. The elder one was learned, but the younger one was stupid and only had one eye. A wandering monk came and asked for lodging, properly challenging them to a debate about the sublime teaching. The elder brother, tired that day from much study, told the younger one to take his place. Go and request a dialogue in silence, he says. So the young monk and the stranger went to the shrine and sat down. Shortly afterwards, the traveller rose and went into the elder and said, "Your young brother is a wonderful fellow. He defeated me completely in the arguments." "Relate the dialogue to me," said the elder one. "Well," explained the traveller, "first I held up one finger representing the Buddha and in the enlightened one. So he held up 2 fingers signifying the Buddha and his teaching. I held up 3 fingers representing the Buddha, his teaching, and his followers living the harmonious life. And then he took his clenched fist in my face, indicating that all three come together in one realization. Thus, he won. And so I have no right to remain here. And with this, the traveller left. "Where is the fellow?" said the younger one as he charged into the elder brother. "I understand you won the debate," said the elder one. "Won nothing. I'm going to beat him up." "Tell me the subject of the debate," asked the elder one. "Why, the minute he saw that I held up, he saw me, he held up one finger, insinuating that I only have one eye. And since he was the stranger, I thought I'd be polite to him, so I held up two fingers, congratulating him that he had two eyes. Then the impolite wretch held up three fingers, suggesting that between us, we only had three eyes. So I got mad and started to punch him, but he ran out and ended it." Now, you've got two totally different realities going on in that situation. And most of us in our relationships are to some extent like that, particularly with husbands and wives. And, we have different things that are going on in our minds. And our minds don't necessarily tell the truth to us all the time. We can deceive our minds quite easily. Now, I'm going to give you an example of deceiving our minds now. So we had a magician that came to the chapel about 2 years ago, and he did this, and I thought it was such a good trick that it just shows how the mind can, be manipulated into telling you something that's not necessarily true. Now, if you're watching at home, then I think Heather's going to zoom in on this. Now, what I want you to do for 30 seconds, I have to time myself here. I want you just to look at this. Now, I don't want you to look at my face, don't want you to look at anything else. Just look at this for the next 30 seconds. So let's see where we go. I've got a clock up there. So keep looking at this. Just focus on it. Focus on all that happening. Okay, now I want you to look at my head. Okay. Did anything happen for anybody when you looked at my head? What happened? Nothing happened? It's supposed to get bigger because it's supposed to get bigger, but it didn't. Is that right? Did it get bigger? Anyway, never mind. Like a magician, I shall move on to the next trick. Okay, so really, we know that the mind tells tricks of us. And I think that the important thing, to realize is that the mind has a total monopoly on our thinking. Our rational mind is the only thing that talks to you all the time. And it has a complete monopoly on what you're thinking about. There isn't another part of your mind that says, no, hang on, that part of the mind might be wrong. It actually just assumes that most of the time that it's completely right. I mean, in business, you don't want to have a monopoly because it's not good for it's not good for competition or anything like that. But our minds totally monopolize our thinking. And we completely identify with our minds. I mean, Nicole is Nicole, and it is her mind. She's put on these clothes. She identifies. We'd have a conversation. Nicole's mind would engage me in a conversation. And between us, there'd be Nicholas's mind, and Nicole's mind would be meeting. And so most of the time in life, we're completely identifying with the thinking that has developed in our minds. And really that thinking is just all the good ideas we've ever had that have come up with a decision of this is how I should dress, this is how I should be, this is the way I should behave. And we tend to be unconscious of the extent to which our minds are running who we are. We're unconscious of how much of our thoughts and how much of the decisions we make just come to us in a moment and are unchallenged. Because we don't tend to watch our minds. We don't tend to see how our minds are working. we tend to allow our minds just to carry on the way they are. And I think, what happens then is we identify ourselves as our personalities. And we say, Nicole is the Nicole personality, and Bob is the Bobby personality, I'm the Nicholas personality. But that word personality is an interesting word. It comes from the Greek word persona. And the persona, anyone know what the persona was? It was the persona in Greek tragedy, was the mask that the actor held in front of his face. And literally, persona means that which is spoken through. That which is spoken through. So our personalities, the things that we're precious about, the things that we like, really are just simply those things which we speak through to everybody else. We develop those personalities and we become very attached to them. You'll see situations where two personalities are arguing in a bar about something and it'll come to a fight. Because one personality is challenging the other personality's worldview, and it'll end up with them actually coming to physical blows. And a lot of that in life is through the fact that we think we're our minds. And the first thing I want to challenge is the idea that we are our minds. I'd want to suggest that you're not your mind, and that there's something more there than your mind. But in order to do that, the first thing one has to do is identify the mind as it's working, to be able to watch your mind and to see your mind operating. Because unless you can see your mind operating, unless you can see your mind working, then you've got no chance of actually being able to witness what's going on in your heads. So, are you up for, this one will work, are we up for actually just doing a bit of observing of our minds? Would that be okay? All I want to do, again, this is developing consciousness. We're literally just observing our minds and watching our minds operate. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do in a moment is to close your eyes. Now, what I want you to agree to do is to not open your eyes during this little period of time. I'm not going to do anything. No one's going to touch you. I'm going to look at the room. Now, if you're doing this at home, Heather, our audiovisual person, is going to put the camera up so you can't actually see anything at this particular moment. But I just want you to notice what your mind does during this thing. So are you up for this? Okay, so I want you to close your eyes and just notice your mind thinking. Notice what it's coming up with. Notice it's listening to the steps outside. Okay, when you're ready, I'd just like you to open your eyes. Now, I did see a couple of you cheating, I want to say, but that's neither here nor there. My modesty was preserved because I turned round. So what I'd like to do, just to turn to the person next to you. Got a two, a two, a two. Maybe, Andrea, you go with David, a two there, maybe two there, and Jack, why don't you go with Donna? And just, what did you notice then with your mind? If you're watching online, you can just notice yourself. If you're sitting with someone, you can talk to them. But just to have a chat with the person, just what did you notice that your mind did with that? I can talk to each other now. Introduce yourselves. So you go with Bobby, and you two go together. That's right. Yeah, sorry. No, you go with that. That's right. That's right. Good. Okay, good. Does anybody want to just say what happened in their minds while that was going on? Any thoughts? Anybody want to say what they noticed or what they imagined? Kim, there we are.
Oh, sure. I
Yeah.
don't think I need that.
Yeah, you will, because the people weren't here.
Oh, yes.
That's right, yeah.
So in the first second or two, I started thinking about what I was going to make for dinner. And then I immediately could care less about what I was going to make for dinner because I thought Nicholas has just dropped his drawers and is peeing in the front of the chapel. And then I was so tempted to peek to see what was really happening, but I did not cheat.
Being a woman of integrity.
Being a woman of integrity sitting next to his lovely wife, I certainly didn't.
Yeah.
And then I thought, good God, now he's going outside in his skivvies. And then, as I'm sure most of you heard, I could not stop laughing because he just cracks me up, and I thought that was brilliant.
Good.
And now I can't wait to hear what he really did.
Good. Thank you. Anybody else? Anybody else like to say? Yeah.
I'll confess I cheated.
I did turn around.
I saw the zipper down. But it was interesting because at first I was noticing my mind and I ate too much lunch and I rushed to get here. So I was aware of my body.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to be with you. And I don't know what part of me just opened my eyes. I'm not sure I was aware that I was like, oh, open your eyes so you can look. It wasn't a conscious cheating.
Yeah.
You know, it was just more like, oh my God, they're open. Oh my, it just happened. So that was just an interesting experiment.
Thank you. Great. Anybody else like to see what? There we are.
Well, at first I thought I'm supposed to think he's undoing a belt and dropping it. But then my mind stepped in and went, no man in this day and age would do that right now.
No, you're quite right. Yes. But of course, you all closed your eyes, but, David here has this situation, David Floria, all the time, where it's all based around, his, what he's hearing. I did this course once with some children, and we got David to come in and talk to the children about what it's like just to operate from that. David, do you want to say a little bit about, just from yourself? I mean, because... I'm going to give you the microphone now, David. Anything, just in terms of how you make up what's going on in terms of your realities. And
Well, just addressing what happened today. You said close your eyes and just go with your thinking. And I'm somewhat of a meditator. I've had a little bit of experience meditating. So I did that, and I wasn't thinking anything.
Yeah.
I had that, a few seconds of no thought, no mind, until you started doing whatever you could do, you were doing, and I couldn't cheat. So I just kind of went to that kind of same meditative, hearing, being here, hearing, and just, going with your antics and being amused at your attempt to guide our thinking or help us think. And I just thought it was great. It was fun, and let you have at it. I thought it was fun.
thank you, David. I just was conscious of the fact that I just take the microphone from you, weren't able to see, whereas everybody else was, there was no closing eyes for you or anything like that. I mean, we tend to take for granted the fact, a lot of us, that mindfulness and, watching your mind is an important thing. But actually, for the vast majority of people in the world, it's not. They have no concept, of being aware of what we're thinking all the time. And if we have no concept of being aware of what we're thinking, then the mind is completely in charge all the time. And you see people in public life and people that we know who have no ability to self-reflect on what is going on. No idea that possibly what they're thinking may not be the case. That actually their mind is desperately trying to work out what's going on. Because, let's face it, the purpose of the mind is to survive. The purpose of the mind is to enable us to survive. And actually, it's more than that, because the purpose of the mind really is to enable the mind to survive. And you can see that the mind will think it's a good idea for you to go off to war. In Eastern cultures, the idea of losing face, people will kill themselves for a whole series of ideas if they feel they've lost something in their minds. And so the mind is always trying to survive. It's always trying to keep ahead of the situation, to make sure that everything is okay. And that's a good thing. But the problem comes when, we're over-surviving most of the time. When someone ends up in a fight in a bar, it's because they're over-surviving. It's because they are, challenging someone to a fight over probably a series of ideas, even over a football team. There are a whole series of things where people identify beyond survival. And, we have to be clear about the fact that the mind, forces you into different situations. You could be going out, you have City Market, and you think, I might have a bit of chocolate because I'm hungry. And so you have this whole thing about, do I have the chocolate? The mind says, no, if you have the chocolate, it'll put weight on, you mustn't have the chocolate, but I'm hungry and I do have the chocolate. And so, you have to choose whether to have the chocolate or not. What the mind doesn't tend to say is, look, you could just wait for a moment and go and get an apple, if you're really hungry from over there, and bring the apple back again. Because the mind likes to see things in binary. This is the way you do it, or that's the way you do it. And that's how advertising works. They'll present you with two opportunities. Either you have the trainers, or you don't. Either you're cool or you're not cool. And the mind just has shorthand for everything as it goes along. And what we have to do is to slow the process down. The whole purpose of actually going beyond the mind is to slow the process down. I love that the definition of power is the ability to act. And when you have power, you can act in any way that you want to act. If you're Prime Minister of a country, your power is measured by your ability to act. And I think so it is with us. Our power is defined in the same way. An alcoholic is powerless because he or she is not able to get out of that cycle of drinking. It defines that person, and it robs them of their ability to act independently. That person's task is to free themselves from their addiction. All of us, have a lot to learn from the 12-step program. The first step is to admit that we're powerless over our addiction. That's the first step, to admit you're powerless over the addiction and that life has become unmanageable. So you gradually have to recover the power of your life by stopping drinking and by consciously making choices that put you in the driving seat. And we have to do the same. We have to admit the extent to which we're run by our minds. And even, the most enlightened of us, the people who've been doing courses all our lives, still, when we're at home, when we're in a situation with our friends, our work, our family, we're still run by our minds. We still end up in those rows. We still shout at the person that cuts us up next to us because, our minds are constantly moving us into that situation where we're not conscious of what we're thinking. Because it's so difficult. I mean, for me, being able to watch your mind, one of the most difficult things I did was gave up smoking. And, I was so addicted to smoking. I thought, I tried to give up and I tried to give up and I tried to give up. And I got to a point where I'd give up smoking in the morning. I'd give up smoking in the morning, and by lunchtime, I'd give up smoking in the morning for life. And then by lunchtime, I'd have a cigarette. You think, well, I'm dead. And I really didn't know what to do about it. I tried absolutely everything. And then I knew someone that I really admired, spiritually and all that sort of business. So I thought, well, I know what I'll do. I'll make an agreement with this person that if I have another cigarette, I'll give them $1,000. And then that'll be okay. I'll have integrity. I'll be able to give up smoking. So I did this. I went to this person and said, look, if I give up smoking, I'm going to give you $1,000. And it was fantastic. I didn't smoke. It was great. I was able to wander around as a non-smoker. And then 2 months later, I was in a bar. And it was the end of work. It was a Friday. Everyone was drinking. Everyone was smoking. In the days where you could smoke in bars. Can you smoke in bars in America? I don't know. No, you can't. No. Can't in England anyway. And everyone was smoking. And I thought, I'm desperate for a cigarette. What should I do? What should I do? And I could feel my mind racing around, trying to find a solution as to how to get out of this bind. And then suddenly my mind got it. I said, I know what I'll do. I'll have a cigarette, and I won't pay Robert $1,000. What's he going to do? He's not going to sue me or anything like that. So I did. I had a cigarette, and I didn't pay him $1,000. But my mind was able to get round that situation. And we have to continually watch our mind. It is a really crucial step. I know we all know that, but every day you'll walk out of this class and you'll forget it within 5 minutes. You'll be complaining about something or whatever it is. So really, what we have to do is be aware of that. We have to be aware of what our mind is doing. We have to be aware of its desire to survive. The trouble is that, what our mind does is at every moment, it tries to work out how to be, how to operate, and what to do. And what happens is, because the mind is continually working out, it has millions of sort of working hypotheses as to, how to get through life. And what happens is that we develop unhelpful habits, persistent, unwanted things that happen in our lives, because I don't know if you notice, your mind just tends to work the same way. In the days when we had boyfriends and girlfriends, you always seem to attract the same sort of girl or the same sort of boy, and they're always the one that either asked you for money or the one that did it. There's a similarity arises about our behavior. And we develop these ways of being that blight our lives in different fashions. And we have to be aware that the short-term decisions that we make turn into long-term situations that might end up with drinking, whatever it is, that start with us not being aware of our minds. I mean, we may have come from a family that didn't show much physical love. I mean, this could be a typical way that these sort of situations, these persistent unwanted conditions happen. We may have come from a family that didn't show much physical love. We then start to get the idea, because our family doesn't do it, that no one expresses, physical affection to each other. We don't show physical affection ourselves. We don't look for it in other people. And gradually we develop a view that simply doesn't include physical affection. We seek out people who live life the same way, and everything we believe about the nature of physical affection is confirmed by that. And so we see life in a certain way that doesn't include a certain aspect of life that everybody else does have. And, what happens is that some of your sensory receptors begin to not work. The ones that relate to physical affection because you've never used them, they don't operate. And in this case, those receptors are failing and the overall picture of nature becomes skewed rather than actually being rounded and showing the fact physical affection is part of that. We build up a reality of life that doesn't include that. And the problem comes when we find that we're developing other needs to compensate for the release of that physical affection brings. We might become stern and controlling, thinking that's the way to create cooperation. We might begin to drink alcohol, to replace the feelings of affection. We might begin to use sex as a way of getting a release that would normally be through gentler, more regular physical affection. We might develop a passion for stamp collecting that enables us to experience that, pouring out our frustrations and gaining satisfaction from that. However we develop, our reality has been affected by that lack of physicality. And we think that this is the way that life is and that everybody else thinks the same way that we do because we don't challenge the way other people think. We might even begin to look down on people that demonstrate any overt physical affection as being weak or soft or unnatural. And what we really mean is they're not natural to us. And therefore we make sweeping judgments as how we should be natural for others. And so we end up, with a persistent unwanted condition. It doesn't have to be physical affection. It could be the inability to make friends or the inability to follow through things to the end because they tend to fail. Or the inability to trust people fully. Or a tendency towards anger and physical violence. Or just end up being ignored. You develop these codependencies based upon these persistent unwanted conditions. There's a lovely poem that describes this in the Tibetan book on Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche, and it's called Autobiography in 4 Chapters. And it just gives the idea of how we develop these unwanted conditions. So, Autobiography in 5 chapters. Chapter 1. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the pavement. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm hopeless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the pavement. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Week 3, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the pavement. I see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Week 4, I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the pavement. I walk around it. Week 5, I walk down another street. And, we have to come to that realization in our lives that some of the behavior that we do is not necessarily, doesn't really support us. And yet we continue to do it all the time. There's a lovely story about those awful experiments with, monkeys and electric shocks and grapes. If you put a monkey in a cage and it presses a button, it gets a grape, and the other button, it gets an electric shock. What happens, is it always goes for the grape. Now, if you swap the buttons over and it starts getting an electric shock where it got the grape from, it'll very quickly learn it and go to the other button to push the button and get the grape. But as human beings, we don't do that. We do things and we maybe get the grape a couple of times, then it swaps over and suddenly we start to feel pain out of a relationship or pain in a particular situation. And we don't change our behavior. We make a whole cultural rationale about how pain is important for us and how we need to experience pain in our lives, because pain really is the memory of the grape, and therefore we should experience the pain because, we we don't go for the grape. We keep having those relationships, we keep having those circumstances where it doesn't work. And so what I'm suggesting is that we have to slow ourselves down. There's that lovely quote that I've used before from Viktor Frankl that says, between a stimulus, something happening, and a response, there is a space. And in that space is your power to choose your response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So, when something happens, there is a space after something's happened. And we have to make a decision in that space as to what we're going to do about what's next. Whereas most of the time what happens is that we just get swept along in life. We just do things one after the other without taking responsibility for that space, without allowing that space to actually inform us, because we just stop, trusting our senses, and we just think our way through life without actually enabling ourselves to pause and take a break. Any thoughts or questions about what I've said so far? So we can assume, I know most of us actually do have that experience of, being able to watch our minds and being able to know that the actual process of being aware of what we're thinking, being aware of what we're seeing is absolutely key. And I think, this is always the point where I like to bring the Dalai Lama in, because he's always quite good on stuff like this. And he talks about the nature of consciousness, and he says that actually there is something more than just your mind and the way it is. And I think it's interesting to ask the question is, if you're not your mind, what could it be? How does consciousness operate if it's not all bound up in just your mind? Where could the definition of consciousness be that includes something that is not just the mind? And this is what the Dalai Lama says. And this is from a book called The Good Heart. He says, I feel that it's quite important to understand what we mean by consciousness. The nature of consciousness or awareness is not something at all material. Consciousness, he says, doesn't have any material shape, form, or color whatsoever. And as such, it's not quantifiable in scientific terms. And thus it doesn't lend itself to any current scientific investigation. And that's interesting. When it comes down to it, you still see articles in journals, scientific journals, not knowing what consciousness is. No one is actually able to put their finger on what consciousness is, because it doesn't lend itself to current scientific investigation. Instead of having some material nature, consciousness by nature is mere experience or awareness. So it doesn't have any physical aspect to it, but it is mere experience or mere awareness. When I say, the Dalai Lama says, when I say I know or I am aware, there seems to be an agent I who engages in the act of knowing or being aware. So there's an aspect of ourselves that is engaged in the act of knowing or being aware. But what we mean by consciousness is that capacity upon which one knows or is aware. So he's saying that consciousness is not the thing itself that we're looking at, like the red jersey. It's the capacity to know. It is that which enables us to know or be aware. In other words, the activity or process of knowing itself is consciousness. It is the facility by which one knows. That's because he says, generally speaking, we associate consciousness with an external object or a pleasant or unpleasant sensation. That's whether we're thinking conceptually or having a sensory experience, that the idea of a blue shirt arises in our consciousness and we say, I see a blue shirt. And therefore, there's a duality between me seeing that blue shirt. The I in me witnesses that blue shirt. And what the Dalai Lama says is that the nature of consciousness is not the seeing of the blue shirt. It is not the senses. It is that by which we see. It is that by which we know. It's the facility of knowing. When you've got a digital camera, the actual image itself is what we see and what we experience. But the actual camera is the facility by which we see or experience. So there is something just beyond us which actually enables us to know or to see or to be aware of. And what he says is that is the nature of consciousness. And he says that if you can maintain a profound alertness, if you're able to put a stop to the mind thinking and being disturbed, the conceptual thought processes and thought patterns, then you can begin to perceive at a deeper level. If you're totally withdrawn, that doesn't help the process. He says you must maintain an alertness and gradually stop the fluctuations of thought and sensory experience within your mind. And he says then it's possible to glimpse the nature of the mind, the nature of consciousness. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to go a little bit beyond the mind, or a little bit behind the mind, to see that which is knowing from a place of consciousness. So are we up for having a go at trying to do that, to go beyond the mind? Are you now, what I'm going to ask you to do, now this here is a mandala, and it's actually a Trinitarian mandala. There used to be a great cross up here a while ago. We do occasionally bring it out at Christmas, at Easter. But actually, the idea of this, it's all in threes and things like that. It has Celtic knots and things. But it's actually something that you can gaze at and look at. And I'm going to ask you in a moment to gaze at that mandala. Now, when you gaze at the mandala, I'm going to bang my little... I'm going to tinkle something and start it. But you've got to gaze at that mandala. And what I want you to do is not press your mind back into focus. And David, what I would like you to do is just to concentrate on the actual noise that is out there at the moment, because you won't be able to look at that. To just be aware of the nature of the sound for yourself. But the rest of you, what I'd like to do is to gaze at the mandala and not press it back into focus. When your eyes will maybe begin to water, try not to blink. If you do blink, try not to press it back into focus, but let it do what it wants to do. Let it move if it wants to move. Let it shift around, and watch your mind wanting to press it back into focus, but instead allowing it to move out into a different direction. Does that make sense? So that's what I'd like you to do. I'm going to give you 5 minutes at doing that. And if you're watching online, then Heather's going to just press in on the mandala so you can actually see the mandala itself. So I'm going to go and sit over there, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes where you're just going to start to look at it now and just allow it to do whatever it wants to do. Just gaze at it. Just watch it forming itself, and just see what happens when you just gaze at it without blinking or pressing it back into focus. So just let go of what your mind is trying to make of the cloth, and let the cloth make itself in your mind. Just notice what your mind is trying to do. Just let it go. Okay, just you can look away now. And just turn to the person that you were just a partner with, and just want to describe what your experience was of doing that. What was your experience of actually looking at that mandala, and what did your mind do, and how did it work? Thanks. Okay, can I just ask you, just maybe in the group, what you noticed during that? Anyone would like to just share what they particularly noticed? What was going on there? There we are, Randy. Great.
Well, I had a hard time keeping my eyes focused on the whole thing. My eyes wanted to focus on pieces.
Yeah.
And look at pieces.
Yeah.
First thing. Then then after I'm looking at it a while, I started just squinting my eye and I see a three-dimensional shape because it looks like a soccer ball.
Yeah.
I just look at the purple. Looks like a soccer ball.
Yeah.
And then I'm going, well, the one thing about it I don't like is all the swirls are going in the same direction. And since if I was doing it, I would want my swirl on this side to be going counterclockwise. I mean, clockwise, this would be counterclockwise.
Yes.
But anyway, I was, kind of taking it apart by pieces.
And you noticed your mind watching all of that and that all happening while it was going on and the thing changing in different ways.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Somebody else. Yes. Jane.
As I gazed at it, I really started to feel the consciousness or the presence within it, and had a great feeling of like oneness, of like a holistic kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And then I noticed my mind saying, well, I wonder if that's wire on the outside,
Yes.
turning it into a circle. And then just bringing it back to that feeling of connection with it.
Did anybody, thank you, Jane. Jane, did it move for anybody? Anybody actually see? Yeah, Patricia, do you want to say what? Thank you.
Yeah, it definitely went into several of them.
Yeah, it definitely went into what?
To several of them. In other words, you just look for a while, and I definitely had blinked.
Yeah.
But after a while, it was almost like psychedelic, and then several of them appeared
Yeah.
of the same thing.
Several of the shapes appeared. Yeah.
Yes, which I enjoyed. And then I noticed, I told a story. I can't remember what it was. But then after that, I started to fall asleep. Yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you. Somebody else? Anybody else? Yeah. Donna.
This is just one thing, but the shadows became much more a part of the whole.
Yes.
They became part of the whole rather than a separate element.
Yeah. Good. Anybody else? Yes, Nicole. Thank you.
Bobby and I were sharing that I was aware of my mind having all these conversations of, am I doing this right? Is it supposed to turn into something? I don't understand what Nicholas is saying. It's something going to appear to me. And then I was aware of being aware that I was having those conversations. And it almost became like when I'm meditating, I'm like, oh, I'm having those thoughts. I'm not supposed to have those thoughts. And I got tired of having the chatter in my mind.
Yes. I mean, I think that's so important because the relationship that you have with your mind is the most important relationship in your life. The relationship you have with your mind, how you frame that, how you operate with it, is just the most important relationship of all. And at any stage in our lives, we have to review that relationship and think, what is happening? What is my relationship with my mind? And what we've done so far is just, I'm always embarrassed about talking about the mind, for an hour and a half, is in that, people have spent their entire lives trying to work out what is going on with the mind and, all the different bits and bobs. I mean, acres and acres of books about it. But when it comes down to it, in this particular environment, in this particular place, all that really matters is what your relationship with your mind is like. That is the important thing for you to actually work out. And it will have changed all the way through your life. When you're little, your relationship, you're just not aware of it when you're little. You just think and blub and you cry and laugh and all that sort of. And gradually you do become aware. So the question I've got for you now is, is what is your relationship with your mind like now? You know, how does it work for you at the moment? You know, some of you, you know, even those of you involved in meditation or different things, in reality, what is your relationship with your mind like? You know, how much of it are you able to actually control your mind? How much is your mind controlling you at the moment in your life? What impact does that have on your circumstances? What impact does it have on your relationships? How does it make you operate in your life? So I want you just to turn to your partner that you've just been talking to and just have a bit of a conversation. If you're watching online, just maybe jot down a few things. You know, what is the state of your most important relationship right now? And see if you can tell the truth about that. You know, what is the state of your most important relationship? And how is it affecting your other relationships? Okay, go for it. Okay, I don't know about you, but, my relationship with my mind is, the way it's intermittent for me. I mean, I notice that my mind wants to succeed a lot in what I'm doing. It wants to work out the best way of making things happen. And it, in the nature of my job and, doing stuff, working in the chapel and things like that, my mind is always trying to, make it work. And I'm continually thinking, how do I make it work? And actually, it doesn't. I do find, though, that just through practice, meditation, I'm able to stop my mind at certain circumstances. If something is, if something's going wrong, my mind does get caught up with it. I have been known to, argue vociferously about something, and it's just my mind that's really arguing for that. I get attached to ideas. I want things to happen the way that I want them to happen. And if they don't happen the way I want them to happen, I do get upset. But I also notice that I am able to create, with all meditation and stuff, that I manage to create a space that I can breathe in, that lets me not just be taken over by my mind. I've managed to exert, and it's taken for me a long time to exert some sort of ability not to get continually caught up with things. I mean, I do get stressed. I do get upset about things. But I can breathe into it. And if that fails, I watch television. So that's the other side of it. I have ways that I have ways that I combat the mind. Watching television is one of them. I'll go running. When I go running with Heather, I'm not very chatty because actually what I'm doing is when I run, I'm simply allowing my body to pound, allowing the things to happen. And I just want to stay in a place where I'm not having deep thoughts and all that sort of business. So I'm beginning, I think, finally to have some sort of control over, what my mind is doing to me. And that changes it so that I can start to not be at the effect. I was reading something from the Bhagavad Gita today. And it talks always about, not being attached to the outcome in life. And I think the ultimate test, of one's relationship with the mind, I mean, if you're going to say there's a good place to be, and I know that's even, deciding what's good, but to not be attached to the outcome is a very freeing thing. And I aim for that, but I fail miserably all the time. I'm always failing. I want there to be full church on a Sunday. I fail the moment. Half the people are like, "Oh no, I failed." So all the time, I notice how attached I am to the outcome, and I'm pleased in a sense. For me, I feel it's developing all the time. It's moving forward, and we'll talk about practice and all that sort of business later on. But it is moving forward, and it gives me more of a sense of the possibility of that stillness and that. The possibility that I'm not my mind. So that's my relationship with it. Anybody would like to talk about, how do you find, what's your relationship with your mind? Anybody want to? Yeah, Patricia.
I can catch my mind to some degree, or catch it in a story.
Yeah.
But give me a little stress.
Yeah.
And life coming at me at several different things.
Yeah.
And the whirlwind wants to take me away. And then once I drank the Kool-Aid, let's say, then I'm off for the ride until I've almost run out my energy somehow on it, or like this broke it for me today, just coming here and doing something different because I was in that. And fear is another one that would take me on the ride. Yeah.
I love that idea of being on the ride, that the mind does take you on the ride, doesn't it? And you've got to get off the horse and have it canter about you a bit. And actually, in the 10 oxiding pictures, the Buddhist pictures, it is all about, It is all about taming the bull and the idea that you tame it because it's a wild creature. And, it is a fantastic thing to realize that it is all the work that there is to do in the world is to work on your mind. It is absolutely everything. And, we even trick ourselves because we try to think up better ways of doing it. And it's just the mind thinking up better ways of doing it. Even the mind will get into, how can I make my mind better? But somehow we have to get off that and just allow it to be. Like when you look at the mandala, you just have to allow it to unfold in front of you in a certain way. And that becomes the nature of being, which is what we're going to get into next week about spirituality. It's when you enter into somewhere different, but you can't do it unless you've got off that ride. And unless you recognize the ride is taking you somewhere.
Yes, and have some distance just to be able to see it and name it. And the other thing is inquire.
Yeah.
And it's like, once I've inquired, I know I've drank the Kool-Aid. I know I'm on the ride. If I can get some distance or name it.
Yeah.
This is stress. This is fear.
Yeah.
And like this morning, I said, you're in self-centered fear. Afraid you're not going to get what you want. Afraid you're going to lose what you have.
Yeah.
So it doesn't change the energy of the loop, except over time.
Yes. Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, last week I said, if you're going to learn anything from this course, the one thing to learn is to appreciate life and appreciate your senses and appreciate the amazing thing. And this week I'm going to say, if there's one thing you're going to learn from this course, it is that this is the most important relationship you have. And in working at it, it is everything. It'll affect absolutely every area of your life. And unless you actually witness and master it, you're just off with the fairies. You're just on the ride. Somebody else, what's your relationship with your mind?
Well, I had just listening to you in this moment. A long time ago, I started having an understanding of the mind and realized it was mentally crazy, my mind, and it would never stop. And then that's when I feel like over the years, learning to recognize it, like what you're talking about and getting off the ride.
Yeah.
But years ago, a teacher said to me, Catherine, just for today, you don't have to figure anything out. You don't have to understand anything. You don't have to do anything. And I said, well, what do I do then today? He's like, just be. And I felt like this whole weight came off because I'm always inquiring. And I think that I'm doing something higher for myself, but I realize it's just a mind, I don't want to swear, but it's a mind game. And so for me, I have to remember all the time, I can just be and it will unfold. Life will unfold. I can trust. But the mind just keeps coming back. No, Catherine, you have to work hard. You have to do this. You have to be something. And so it's really an invitation that makes me feel safer to realize I can stop and everything will be okay. Like I will still have a step to go the next moment. I don't have to think about it first or manifest it or make it happen.
No.
So
I think that's absolutely right. And we've talked a lot here about coming off that ride, and we've talked a lot here on Sundays about dropping down into our hearts. And when you drop down into our hearts, you're actually breathing your life and beating your life rather than having a commentary going on that's telling you what to do. And that breath into it, and when we get into meditation and stuff like that, we'll get into, you avoid the whole tyranny of the mind, where the mind is continually, because even when you're trying to work it out, the mind is trying to work it out. And somehow you have to stop the focus on that and have the focus be on something else. And, the focus will be on the wonderful sunlight coming in. The focus then goes into a different place. And we have to look, that is the relating. That's how that is the work, is looking at that. Somebody else about what's your relationship with your mind like? Yeah. Andrew and then Donna. Yeah.
David and I just spoke about with that and recognizing patterns you have, and even if you recognize them and you still do them, at least that's for me the first step, because hopefully next time you start changing what you were doing. But what we mainly spoke about is both of our practices in meditation, and how with meditation you can go into that space, but you're not judging. So you're there with your mind. There's thoughts going on. It's all happening. But, so you're processing a lot anyway when you give yourself time to sit or just for contemplation if you close your eyes. And so when you're actually out and ego's up again and you're, in the world walking, that sometimes when an action happens, instead of suddenly reacting, you've got that space of mindfulness where you've given your mind through meditation time to sort of settle itself a little. So when you are out there, someone beeps the horn, instead of you like turning in the car thinking, I'm going to take this person down, you've got some space where you can, think about it, that mindfulness, and then you react on it if you need to. Or maybe you just sit in the car and you smile at that person instead of, how you would have automatically have reacted. And that mindfulness, I think, comes from, we were talking about for us what's worked is meditation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Donna.
Oh, thanks. I really related to what you said about your mind wanting to achieve certain things. But I realized that I so appreciate that space, that distance, that all of a sudden you can realize that you and your mind are separate. But then the next step is, what kind of perspective do I have? Is it, if it's something I'm worrying about, is it my story, or is it a true, is it something I'm just creating, or is it actually true? Is it really insight and I really should think about it? Or is it something that my mind has created and projected and I go down the ride, as Patty said? But then I just realized right now, I'm just jumping into the next level of that same thing, rather than letting go of the outcome. I'm just jumping into the next level of rational thinking. Is that really true or not true?
Yes.
So that's so the distance got me to the first step, but it didn't go the rest of the way.
I mean, I have to say that our minds are here to help us, obviously. Your mind is there to work out how to cross the road, how to put food on the table. And, and there are circumstances where, you just have to use your mind to navigate your way through life. But there comes a point where that's not enough, where you think, okay, I've got that far now, but if I'm going to want to go deeper, if I'm going to want to move into some of these areas about how do I do that? And really what I'm saying is you let go of the context being the mind. One of the ways that the gurus always end up with trying to break the hold that the mind has is by giving koans. And I'm just going to finish just with a koan. And the idea of a koan is the mind can't grasp it, so the mind can't actually assimilate it, so it just breaks the mind a bit. So this is the koan called Geshu's Wheel. Getsuan said to his students, Geshu, the first wheel maker of China, made 2 wheels of 50 spokes each. Suppose you removed the nave united the spokes. Suppose you removed the nave uniting the spokes. What would become of the wheel? And had Geshu done this, could he be called the master wheel maker? If anyone can answer this question instantly, his eyes will be like a comet and his mind like a flashing lightning. When the hubless wheel turns, master or no master can stop it. It turns above heaven and below earth, north, south, east, and west. Now, we've been exploring, the forest of the mind, swinging from tree to tree, hopefully beginning to see, the wood for the trees and, enabling ourselves just to bring our heads above ground and actually start to see above that. And next week, we're going to look at what that is, what one might see if one is not looking from the mind. What is the view? Where is one looking from? And what might one see in life if one is not looking from the mind? Thank you for your attention today. There's a handout at the back. Please feel free to do that. If you're watching online, there's a handout just on the screen. There's a note there, a plate there for contributions. If you'd like to empty your wallet into it, I'd be most grateful. Of course, I don't mind. I'm not thinking of the outcome of that at all. And I'll very much look forward to, if you're here, seeing you next week. Thank you very much indeed, everyone.